Hi Stampers, welcome to another episode of Something Else, where we stamp on surfaces other than paper. You may be looking at this card wondering, where's the part that's other than paper? And it's right here. It's actually this flower, which is made from fabric. I'm incredibly excited to show you today's technique. It came to me in a waking dream. I thought to myself when I was waking up, I love embossing on paper. I wonder what other surfaces you can emboss on. And since I just started sewing this past week, I decided, what about fabric? And this is the result of that endeavor. So let's take a look at how you go about doing this embossing on fabric. The first tip I would offer is that the fabric that you choose, you probably want to choose a cotton fabric instead of a synthetic, because when you apply heat to a synthetic fabric, it actually could melt or curl up. So I used a thin cotton black fabric. I actually went ahead with my fabric. Let me show you a piece on a white background so that you can see. I actually took my black fabric and I ironed it and also gave it a little bit of spray starch to make it a little bit stiffer. And then I ran it through my Big Shot through the Flower Folds die, which is a Stampin' Up! Exclusive die, so that I could get these great flower shapes. And these flowers come in different sizes. This is the largest of the flowers in the Flower Folds die, and I'm using this one to demonstrate for you just so it's easier to see. The one that I used on the card is actually a bit smaller flower. So how do we go about doing this? Very similar to stamping and embossing on paper. Let me show you. The first tip I have is, well, I guess now it's the second tip other than the fabric tip. You are going to want to use your craft ink as you would for regular embossing. And oftentimes I use my Versamark pad when I'm embossing on paper. However, when it comes to fabric, it's really difficult to see that Versamark ink on the fabric. So I suggest you pull out your Whisper White craft pad and use this, since that'll really show up on your fabric, particularly on this black fabric. So we're going to go ahead and open up that stamp pad. And then we're going to take one of the stamps from the Charming stamp set. I really like this floral image. And all you're going to do is ink up that stamp, and you're going to stamp it right on the fabric. And we're going to do that a number of times all around your fabric. You can turn your stamp, again, just as if you were stamping on paper. Just go ahead and go around and stamp where you'd like all over your flower. Okay, I'm liking the look of that, so we're going to set that aside. Remember, when you clean your craft ink, you probably want to use a paper towel or a separate Stampin' Scrub because your craft ink is pretty sticky and it will kind of gunk up your Stampin' Scrub. The next thing we're going to do is take our embossing powder. I keep my embossing powder in these containers to make it easy to use. And I also have a spoon that is usually in here, but today is right beside here. When I'm doing embossing with paper, I usually do it right over this little bin, but for today's demonstration, and because it's fabric, I'm going to get a different piece of scrap paper that doesn't have any ink on it right now. And we're going to go ahead and use that. And I'm just going to take this spoon and I'm going to put the embossing powder, heck, forget the spoon, I'm just going to pour embossing powder all over this flower. And you want to give it a good coating. And then what we're going to do is lift up the flower, again, over your scrap paper. Oh, look at that. You can already see that it's stuck to that ink. And we're going to tap, tap, tap off the extra embossing powder. Just tap that off. Look at that. Really similar to what happens on paper. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. Actually, it might be a good idea, instead of setting this aside, for me to dump it all back in here now. Otherwise, it's going to end up all over the floor, which has happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to you. And I'm going to grab my other piece of scrap paper back, set the flower on here. I like to use this wooden stick. I think it's a sculpting tool. I have no idea where I picked it up. You could probably get it at a craft store. You can use a popsicle stick to hold this down. When I heat emboss, I like to use something wood as opposed to something metal, because something metal will actually heat up in my hand. We're going to go ahead and take our embossing gun. Before I turn this on, what's really nice about embossing on fabric is that it actually takes less time to heat up than on paper. So we're going to start our gun, and we're going to go ahead and emboss. And you want to move your gun around a little bit and just heat up. You can see it's already starting to change. You just want to heat up where you've embossed. And there it goes. We need time-lapse photography here, huh? And you can see it's starting to get really, really bright on that fabric. And now it's really picking up its pace, which is great. There you go. Get back here. This little bit seems a little stubborn. Excellent. And now that is embossed, and again, unlike paper, this really cools very fast, this fabric, so I can pick it up. It's really not hot at all. So that makes it really, really nice. What I found is that the gold shows up really, really well. I found that if I use the white craft ink and then tried to emboss in silver on the black, that for some reason it was showing up a bit more as gray as opposed to kind of a shiny silver. So I really like this gold effect. Looking back at the card, I just want to show you, you'll notice that I have a corduroy button in the center here. And you'll notice that it's black. Well, I didn't have any black corduroy buttons. This is a tip that I've shown in a separate video in the past. What I did have were chocolate chip corduroy buttons. And my big tip for this card, and you can use the lighter colored buttons as well, is I just take some colored ink, classic ink, of the color that I want for the button, and I just sponge all over that corduroy button to make it the color that I want. You can turn your pretty and pink buttons into, your only orange or really rust, so you can play around with these buttons to actually color them the color that you want. So there you have it. That is embossing on fabric. I can show you that line images work quite well also. This is another one of the stamps from that charming stamp set that works just great, as do the others. But you can get these really nice fine detailed lines working with embossing on a nice clean cotton fabric. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Something Else. I'd love to see what you're able to make. If you have comments, please feel free to leave them. I'd be happy to answer whatever questions that you have. Happy stamping!